In Ireland in the year 2000, it was a changing country. We were in the midst of the Celtic Tiger. There was plenty of money around after the depression of the 80s. A new generation had emerged, more liberal and less repressed by the church than the generations before them. If you were a young adult in Dublin, it was certainly the place to be. There were trendy places to go and new modern apartments. Ireland had its own breed of yuppies. I lived and worked in a radio station in Dublin at the time, and life was good. It was still very much the thinking that Ireland and its capital were relatively safe compared to other cities, and you would think nothing of talking to strangers, accepting an invite to a house party or walking alone even at night. Trevor Deely was one such man. He had moved from his hometown in Naas to Dublin, having got an IT job in asset management for Bank of Ireland. He lived in an upmarket area of Ballsbridge in a shared apartment. He was a social guy liked by his friends and colleagues. Traditionally, Ireland did not start Christmas or shopping until after the 8th of December. That is a religious holiday, so many would be off work and travel to Dublin to start the season. It was kind of like the Irish equivalent of Black Friday. Although Trevor and his workmates were not off on Friday the 8th, they chose the night of the 7th to have their Christmas party. After work, they went for drinks and then on to the official part in the Hilton Hotel. They left there around midnight and went on to a club, where they stayed till approximately 3 a.m. At this point, Trevor decided to call it a night and head home. It was very wet and windy, and he had only got a jacket to protect him from the elements. Possibly he would normally get a taxi, but this particular night there was a taxi strike on. I remember it well, as I was out for my Christmas party that night too, and remember walking home, albeit in the opposite direction to where Trevor would be heading, as I lived on the north side in North Great Georgia Street. Where Trevor lived was on the south side. On his way home, he had to pass his place of work, and for some reason he chose to call in. The premises were manned 24 hours, so the security guard apparently let him in. While inside, he had a cup of coffee and a chat with his mate Carl, who was on duty. He checked his emails, obtained an umbrella and headed back into the night, but he never reached his destination. Somewhere along the way, it was somewhat a short walk, he vanished, never to be seen again. On his way into the work building, he was seen conversing briefly with a man dressed in black, who had been hanging around for about half an hour beforehand. It did not seem to be aggressive in any way, and from the CCTV it appears to me to perhaps be a homeless person or an addict asking for money or perhaps a cigarette, which was very common. When Trevor exits, there is no sign of the guy. It seems strange that anyone would go back into work at that hour intoxicated, but back then things were much more informal than they are now. Going onto his work computer strikes me as a bit suspicious, but as most people did not have internet at home and smartphones were not a thing, perhaps it was innocent. But one wonders if they were simply work-related, and if so, why couldn't they wait a few hours till the morning? The next day he didn't arrive in work, but his manager thought he had overslept or had a hangover, even though all reports say he was not severely drunk, only tipsy. Some weekends he would go home, but he had told family he wasn't coming that weekend. It wasn't until he didn't show up on Monday that the alarm was raised. People realised that no one had had any contact with him since the early hours of Friday morning. After the Gardaí were informed, several possibilities were followed up on. However, the family appears to have provided most of the suggestions to them. CCTV was obtained, but as it was all on VHS back then, it was recorded over within a day or two. And by this time, 4 days had passed. Only 2 pieces were obtained, that of his workplace and from an ATM machine a few blocks away. The footage from it captured Trevor passing with a big golf umbrella, and a few seconds later followed by a man in black, a lone female and then a couple. When the pieces were put together, there was a question mark over whether the man in black was the same one who had approached him outside work. That man has never came forward, but if he were homeless or an addict, that might explain it. But it seems unlikely a man on foot in pursuit would have been able to make Trevor disappear, even if he had attacked him. As there were 3 other people not far behind, it's surprising that they did not hear or see anything untoward. However, something happened. They dredged the canal and another river on his route in case he had fallen in, which proved fruitless. They looked at the possibility of a hit and run, and even suicide, but there was no body, no sign of blood, skid marks or glass anywhere in the vicinity. Robbery or fraud was also considered, but Trevor worked in an office for the bank, not somewhere where cash was actually kept, so it was ruled out. He had made a call on his mobile that was pinged to a location he was known to have been at, but at that time, even though his phone rang out the day after he went missing, they were unable to ping the location of the phone from incoming calls. None of his belongings were ever recovered, but President Clinton was arriving on that Tuesday, and the American embassy was also in that area, so everywhere had been cleaned and searched over the weekend. As no one knew he was missing, finding an item of clothing, an umbrella, or even a phone would not have really raised concerns. They were looking for dangerous items, not personal effects. Despite extensive circulation of his image, the only person to come forward was the female from the couple who had been walking behind, and they had seen nothing. Trevor had just returned from Alaska, where he had gone on a short holiday to visit a girl he seemed to have taken a shine to, even though they had only met. Inquiries were also made there, but it was another dead end. In 2017, police received a tip that he was buried in a site the other side of the city, but after excavation no body was recovered, only a gun, which is impossible to say if it was connected to the case. One line of inquiry that does not seem to have been suggested is that he left of his own free will. No one knows why people decide to disappear and create a new identity for themselves, but it does happen. People around us may think they know everything, but is it possible Trevor had personal secrets? His passport or bank account was never touched, but back then obtaining ID was very easy. As he worked in a bank and was a whiz at computers, I'm pretty sure he could have created authentic documentation, at least to provide bank statements in a different name, which may have allowed him to make a new life somewhere else. I'm unsure if trains, buses, ports or airports were ever checked, or indeed his computer analysed to see what information was available on it. Although hard on those he left behind, it would be nice to think that he's somewhere enjoying his life rather than the alternative. Let's be honest, if your neighbour or work colleague was a missing person somewhere in the world, would you really know?